Welcome to the From Guilt to Good podcast, where we discuss all the things caregivers wish people would talk about but don't, won't, or can't. Hi, my name is Jeanette Yates, and I'm a lifelong caregiver for my mother and founder of the Self Caregiver, where I help caregivers feel good, not guilty. Okay. And in this week's episode of From Guilt to Good, we are joined by Stephanie Muskat. Stephanie became a primary caregiver to her mom when she was just 19 years old and cared concurrently for her grandmother at the age of 23. For 16 years, Stephanie provided care both near and far and engaged in tremendous advocacy with the healthcare system until her mom's passing in March of 2025. Stephanie was a sandwich caregiver for almost 8 years and understands the impact of young caregiving and sandwich caregiving firsthand. Stephanie's caregiving experience and the gap she experienced from a mental health and emotional perspective led her to pursue her professional career and start of her mental health practice, Compassion and Caregiving. She's an award-winning registered social worker and psychotherapist and has additionally worked in acute care and mental health research at several major hospitals for over a decade. Stephanie has been featured on numerous television networks and radio stations and was presented at numerous universities and public events to raise awareness about mental health and mental health support. She's additionally the creator and host of the popular podcast, Caregivers Compass. Stephanie sits on several committees and advocacy groups aimed at raising awareness and change for caregivers. And it is all of these reasons why I'm so honored to have her join us today. Welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you so much for being here. It's so nice.
Yeah, I'm so glad we get to do this. I always start off by asking people to share their own caregiving journey or experience they have in caregiving. So I know I mentioned some of that in the intro, but please tell us a little bit about your caregiving journey.
Yeah. So, you did touch on some of that. I'll fill in some of the blanks. So, my mom got sick at a time when I don't even think caregiving was a word that anyone used. And I definitely didn't know that that's what I was doing for, I don't even know how many years. But it definitely opened my eyes to a lot. I was at university. I'm an only child, so everything fell on me. And I was trying to navigate all of that while, also dealing with my studies and figuring out who I am as an adult because I was just a year over 18. And I think it shaped my entire life. I went through very low lows. I learned a lot along the way. I had beautiful, meaningful moments and memories with my mom and my grandmother. I am truly honored to have been able to be in that space and that role with both of them. But at the same time, on the other hand, it's something that was just, awful at times. Like there's no other way to say it. But it's definitely been a journey. And my mom progressed over time also, as often happens with a dementia. And I went through having children while she was unwell and experiencing tremendous amounts of grief, which I didn't know existed because I thought having a baby would make me really, really happy, but it emphasized a lot of grief. And then we hit, her passing and end of life and all that that's brought up for me. But it has fueled all of the work that I do. And I'm grateful for it in a really weird way, right?
Yeah.
It's weird.
Right. Well, it's interesting that you brought up like you started being a caregiver, but you didn't that's not what. And I think part of the reason it wasn't a word, like for me, I was 9, 10, 11.
Right.
None of my peers were chatting about caregiving. I wonder, if that might have been different if my journey started later. But the same with you, like you're, get in college, trying to figure out your life. It doesn't occur to you that that's what you're doing. It's just like, I'm just a daughter.
That's it. I was going to say I was a daughter, and you took the words right out of my mouth. I also don't think there were any caregiver named organizations at the time. And I think that helps people put a name to things now. But definitely back then, there were no caregiver anythings. It was the Alzheimer's Society, right? And my mom didn't have Alzheimer's. She had frontotemporal dementia. So I didn't fit in there. And then I found a group of people whose parents had cancer and I was placed into that group because there was no one else, and so, but it wasn't called caregivers group. It was called group for children of people with cancer. My mom didn't have cancer. So I don't even remember when the word caregiver was said to me, because I also thought of caregiver as, like a PSW or an aide, or like it was never something that was on my mind. So yeah, but I was a daughter and I was a granddaughter.
I think that that's a good point too, that, especially when you're caregiving for a parent and, if you're a daughter and you're caring for your mom, there's even that deeper connection. And there is a point where you are just being like a helpful person. Like you're not,
Mhm.
you're just helping out, and then there's that somewhere that you cross the Rubicon. It's because you become a caregiver and you're
Yeah.
like, wait, I just thought I was, helping out. But also it is scary to go into taking care of someone else and not feeling like you have anyone else that understands what you're going through. And certainly, like, when I started talking about my, caring for my mother, like everyone assumed she was just really, really old
Mhm.
and that she had dementia, and she wasn't, and she didn't. She did have a little start to have some cognitive decline, like in the months leading up to her passing, but I didn't have to deal with that aspect of, taking care of your parent like many people do. And so it was, they would be like, well, trying to communicate with somebody and they would have advice and tips. And it's like, that doesn't work for my situation because
Yep.
my mom
Yep.
has more agency than that. But anyway, so I, so is that part of the reason that these gaps and not having people like you or people that understood, is that what started compassion and caregiving, or was there more to it? Let's get into that a little bit.
Yeah, there was a lot more to it. I was always very interested in mental health per
Yes.
se. Some of it was because I had struggled with my own mental health, but some of it was because I just loved being people called me the high school therapist. Like people would call me in high school and I would talk to them for hours on the phone and make them feel better. And I loved it. I loved it. I mean, that's not at all what I do now. Like not even close to what I do now and how I do it, but it was a passion of mine. It made me excited. It fueled me. I actually went to university to be a veterinarian, and I did not come out of university as a veterinarian. So, somewhere along the line, I realized that, there was a lot more to this mental health thing than I knew. And I always knew I wanted to start my own business. I knew that I wasn't one to work for other people. And I had a much bigger vision in life than I think would be contained in a box. I don't believe in glass ceilings. I shattered glass ceilings. I think you're very similar to me. So so I became a social worker. I got my master of social work, and I say that like it was easy. It wasn't easy. And then I worked in the hospital actually as an acute care social worker for almost a decade. And it was during that time that all that I knew as a caregiver and the experiences I had with navigating the system, feeling the mental health concerns and challenges and everything that came with it was emphasized over and over and over, like every day. And I thought to myself, is there nothing more for these people? I mean, this is just horrible. And then COVID hit, and I saw the caregivers unable to access the hospital and unable to see the person they care for. And the social workers were the one that were facilitating the FaceTime calls. But imagine giving a person with end stage dementia an iPad. Like it was impossible. And we also saw a decline in the people who had those diagnoses because they weren't with their caregiver. And so I actually started compassion and caregiving during COVID as a way to provide validation and support to caregivers. And I didn't see it online that much. It was like 2021, and there weren't a lot of caregiver pages back then. And I would interview caregivers anonymously and say, can I share your quotes on my Instagram page? And just to provide other people with support. That was the only thing it was. And if you go way back to the beginning of my Instagram page, that's what it is. It's just quotes from
Yeah.
random people to show other people they weren't alone.
Yeah.
And it,
So valuable.
yes. And I didn't think it was going to become like a therapy company. But then suddenly people in my network and space would say, hey, I see you know a lot about caregiving. I know this person who's really struggling. Can you give them therapy? And I would say, well, I don't have time. I'm working in the hospital. And they would say, I'll pay you whatever you want, but we need this. And we don't have specialized mental health supports for caregivers accessible to us. So I started doing that a little bit. I didn't take whatever I gave them a reasonable rate, but I started doing that and I loved it. And I loved it so much that I'm like, okay, how can we do this? Because I would see such reward and benefit. Whereas in the hospital, I was enforcing rules based off of a healthcare system that I didn't always agree with. And so I ended up doing both at the same time for a while, which was like 2.5 jobs in one. And then eventually it got big enough that I was able to leave. So that's essentially what it is. And now I do a lot of work trying to change the system, policy work, a lot of workshops, webinars, teaching. So it's become a lot bigger than the quotes on my Instagram page, but that's a very long version of how it started.
Well, and I think that's a great segue into the next thing that I wanted to talk to you about because, one of the reasons that I probably started following you when you were sharing all those quotes, actually, who knows? But, I think that the mental health and emotional health component of caregiving, especially family caregiving, because like you mentioned, caregiving can be a lot of different things, right? But especially when you're caring for a parent, there's some things that we don't always know are coming as part of caregiving. We think we're going to be very organized. Like if we get the opportunity to know ahead of time, not like you and me, where we just were caregivers for years before we realized what we were doing. But when a caregiver, when a adult child becomes a caregiver, a lot of times it's because of a diagnosis or something that's coming. They see it, they're told, and they have a little bit of time. But there's this preconception that, like, okay, we're just going to be really organized. We're going to communicate, bada bing, bada boom. I'm going to do whatever it takes. It'll be fine. And then the emotional and mental health component comes sweeping in. And for me, I think that a lot of caregivers are just underprepared. I know I was. Mm-hmm. But you posted something not long ago. I reached out and said that I want to dive deep into this. So you say, and I'll put this post in the show notes for those of you that want to take a look at it. But it says, you can give all the caregiving tips in the world, but if we don't begin to acknowledge and explore the guilt, shame, and grief underneath, the same struggles will keep returning in new forms. And I think that is like the whole thing. Mm-hmm. That's the whole ball game right there. Tell me a little bit about this post.
Yeah, so that post came because in my work with caregivers, clients, myself, I have noticed over time that there is this perception that if I do all the things I should do, air quotes, then I should be okay. And it's not as simple as that. And I wish it was. And this might be a bit of a make people upset situation because there's a lot under the surface that we don't see until we start to do the things that we think we need to do. For example, if you say, oh, I don't have any time for myself and I'm realizing I'm going to burn out and explode and I need to start incorporating some practices into my daily life, you may find yourself incorporating the daily practices, but not be able to focus on the daily practices because you're so guilty and full of shame because you're not caring for the other person. Or you might,
my whole story.
Well, there you go. Or you might put a boundary up because that's what you're told, right? I'm not saying these are bad meaning things. These are actually effective strategies that we do all the time. But you put a boundary up, and the biggest thing I hear is I put up the boundary and the guilt and shame was so profound when I put up the boundary that I said it wasn't worth it. Mm-hmm. And I let the boundary down and therefore continued on the way I was before. Am I struggling? Yes. Am I surviving? No. But I can't handle the emotional toll underneath. The other piece of it that we don't name enough in caregiving is grief. And a lot of clients that come to me will talk to me about situations in their life and they'll say, I'm so mad, or, I have so much rage, or I feel frustration all the time, or I'm comparing myself to other people all the time. I don't have joy in anything that I do, even if I use all the strategies. Right. I'm like, well, because you have grief. And they don't see that. So the reason I say that is because we can put that surface level thing in place, whatever it might be. But if we don't have the self awareness or the ability to manage what's underneath to our core, we're not going to be very good at doing any of that stuff. And then it's a waste of time and energy and what we hear.
Well, first of all, I feel like if somebody can identify that they take the boundary down because they feel guilt and shame, they're a step ahead of the people who say, so congratulations.
Well, we get to that. We will prompt that. I would say a lot of people can't identify that, but we will say in session, like, what happened to that thing? And then they'll be like, oh, I don't know. And we have to actually, it's not that easy. You're absolutely right. Some people can.
Normally what happens is I put up a boundary and they keep taking it down.
Sure. Yes, absolutely.
So that is the first step, is like the boundary doesn't work. And then the second step is like, oh, they're trying to knock it down, but the reason it's falling down is because I'm letting it, and sometimes it's because it's not a practical boundary. You just put up some boundary that somebody else told you that they did, or, it's the guilt and shame that, gets you. So like that is definitely something that I dealt with for sure. I think also, like you mentioned, with almost, you talked about like the things that you think you need to do. I think that is another thing for me. I know in my own story, I was doing a lot of things that I either was told a caregiver did, saw other caregivers doing, or there was a perception. Again, it comes to that shame piece, that, if I don't do this, other people, maybe my mom that I was caring for, my, her sisters, or, my aunts, whoever, people at my church, they're going to think I'm not doing a good job.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want that. So I'm going to do these things. And like to get out of to break free from all of that was like the great, work of my caregiving journey. But I did not do it without the support of a therapist, to your point. Where like I needed somebody to come and pull these things apart. I don't know about you, you as a therapist, or as a social worker, but when I went to my first appointment with my social worker, I said, I need help to like get less stressed out so that I can be a better caregiver. It wasn't this idea of like, she's, I thought everything, it was all my fault. And like, I needed to fix myself in order to be a better caregiver. And while I did have some things to heal from, there wasn't something wrong with me like I thought. But I'm wondering if you get caregivers that come to you and say, like, just help me be a better caregiver. Like, what am I doing wrong?
I don't hear that as much as when they come to me, they're really, really, really mad at life, and usually, and they will tell me, I don't want to feel these feelings anymore. So just help me get rid of these feelings so that I can continue on with my life, because this is really bothering me at this point and I'm over it. That's more of what I'll get. And sometimes it's, I'm having a hard time caring, but a lot of the time it's, I'm done caregiving. And so just tell me how to stop feeling this way, because I have no choice. Right. And yeah. And so it's like, get rid of my feelings for me. I literally just had a client who said, I don't want to feel angry anymore. How do I get rid of my anger?
And then you have to tell them
you can't. Well, you can pretend. We can pretend. But then that goes into the more you repress and push down the guilt, shame, and grief.
Yeah.
The more it rears its beautiful head.
Yeah.
Down the line. We don't get rid of any of these things. In fact, they're actually there for a purpose. Right. Your body is trying to tell you something.
Yes.
Or guilt and shame can be primed from childhood, right? Something that our parents teach us. And so when you're caring for a parent or you're caring for somebody else, it is normal, if we learn something in childhood or even as a member of a society, we have to feel shame. Like that's just, otherwise we'd be doing really awful things. But it's coming from somewhere. And so your body is actually doing what it's supposed to do. It's smart. It's like, warning, you can't be doing that. Go do the thing you should be doing. And we're like, oh my God, get rid of that. Right. How are you doing that?
Well, I remember like, I am not a trained professional. I'm not a therapist. If being in therapy could get you a therapy license, I would have one. But I don't. But I am fascinated by so I study a lot. So like if my therapist brings up, Gottman method, I'm going to go learn all about God, all this kind of stuff. I'm kind of geeky that way. Like I love that kind of stuff. So one of the things that I really got into was the whole like nervous system fight or flight
Mm.
situation. Plus, I had some experience with that because I went through my own eating disorder recovery and learned about nervous system stuff that way. But I remember, you know, at first when I realized that I was in caregiver burnout, I was like, my body's in fight or flight, like that's what my feed was telling me. That was this kind of stuff. And then so like I was trying to get out of it. Like that's what a lot of like learn how to, you know, stop being in fight or flight. And it's like, or like, yes, but also why not? And so like I would talk to my therapist about this, but like instead of try to get out of fight or flight, before that, I have to try to figure out why I think caregiving for my mom is a lion.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep.
I run away from that, and so like really kind of reassessing, but to your point, like actually dealing with like why I feel like my life is in danger.
Well, that's exactly it. There is a reason you are in fight or flight, right?
Right.
And usually, I mean, sometimes it is just related to brain chemicals, but a lot of the time it's a combination of things. And I find it very interesting. Like if you broke your arm, you wouldn't say get rid of my arm so I don't feel, I like it would be like, okay, I've got to wear a sling and I have to make sure I don't move it and I have to. Why is mental health different? I don't really know, but for some reason we just take these horrible exacerbated states that we're in and say get rid of them so that I can move forward, but it doesn't apply to our physical body. Anyway, I mean, our society is changing. It's cultural. And still, this is North America. I mean, in other cultures, they don't think of mental health this way. So we are in a very different space than we used to be. And I think like my children definitely see mental health differently and the way they learn about it in school. Their teachers talk about how they see therapists. Like it's amazing. I was not raised that way. So yes, but to your point, you can't just get rid of fight or flight when you think that caring for your mom is a lion, right?
Yeah. So, one of the other things that I wanted to chat with you about regarding that post is, and it's something that I have changed about my own content, the kind of content that tells us, 3 easy steps or
Mm-hmm.
5 tips for whatever, or here are 10 self-care things you can do. And while those have a place, perhaps, uh, I, for me, I felt like whenever I shared, tips, like it was hard to share the tips without like I always wanted to caveat and go, but also get therapy. And
Right.
also like this isn't you're not going to it's not just easy as these 3 tips, but then that kind of spoils the 3 tips. So like I want to
These
talk
will not help you, but you should take it
right.
anyway.
I
Yeah.
mean, why not? So like trying to figure out how to be a responsible sharer of content on the internet, whether it's someone who's a professional, and we are going to talk a little bit more about the role of therapist versus non-therapy support here in a minute, but specifically when it comes to how we are talking to caregivers as content creators who also happen to work in this field, but also are caregivers ourselves. How are we supposed to encourage and help without giving easy things that don't help?
Okay.
Like what are we
Well,
supposed to do?
I think that it's a lot of onus to put on us to think that we're going to fix people's lives. I think that we're trying to help as much as we can as supporters and content creators who may not or maybe are professionals. Even within therapy, I am very aware that I can't fix every aspect of somebody's life. So I think that we come in with the intention of bettering someone's life or giving them perspective. Your posts are phenomenal for that. I mean, your perspective on things and the things that you say are just incredible. I always like, yeah, you're right. So I think that we have to take the onus off of ourselves to fix other people's entire lives. We also have to make the assumption that if we're sharing 3 tips today, that hopefully they saw what we posted last week, which was, well, you've got to deal with all of these other things if you want to,
Yeah, the
touch on
tips
these
aren't
things.
going to work unless you deal with the
We
grief.
can't put a disclaimer on everything, but also everyone is in a different stage of their experience. Some people are very insightful and aware, and some people are not insightful and aware. Some people have no desire to become insightful and aware and won't touch a therapist with like the longest pole you'll ever find. So
Right.
for some people, those tips are very valuable with where they're at. And so we also have to be mindful that everybody's in a different place. And it's okay for us to share strategies and tips, but we also know that, unless you deal with stuff at the core, those aren't going to get you very far. But you hope your audience is dealing with the stuff at the core. I think it's important to name and identify mental health regardless of who you are, as long as you do evidence-based research, which you do, because you just told me you do a lot of research. But there's people out there posting things that I wish they weren't posting, and very vulnerable populations taking it in and thinking it's true because they're desperate. And I think that if you're naming something, if you are using research and evidence-based knowledge behind your post and putting it out there, that's great. Like, let's all name what people are feeling in caregiving. Let's all name what's going on. Let's all share strategies and tips that we have. That's all great.
Well, and I think this kind of moves us into our next thing, like the difference between, what I ended up doing for my content, because I was like, okay, like here are 3 tips that helped me.
Mm-hmm.
However, they're not going to help everybody. So instead of trying to share the 3 tips, I started talking about when the 3 tips started working for me.
Smart.
And so like, it kind of is like, like maybe the graphic is the 3 tips or whatever, but then the caption is going to say, these are all great,
Mm-hmm.
whatever, here's how this worked for me. For people like me who do not have a professional background, it's better for me to share my experience and talk about the ways therapy helped me. I'm not telling you to go to therapy. If you're reading my content, you should go to therapy. What I'm saying is, I'm going to tell you all the different ways therapy helped me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to tell you all the things I learned in therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And then occasionally my content will say, and if you want to try therapy, here, here's some ideas about what to look for, or reach out to my friends over at Compassion and Caregiving or whatever, And so for me, that has been really helpful. But I want to switch to our next topic, which I really did want to talk about the difference, and we kind of already are hitting it, but the difference between someone like me who's not professional and just sharing my caregiving experience, which is vast. It's 40 years worth of knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
I have a lot of information and insight. And then someone who's coming from a professional perspective that can share more of that research-based content or research-based ideas. What are some ways that we can, whether we're professional or not, be helpful and ethical as we speak about mental health, guilt and shame, et cetera?
Yeah. I mean, again, I think I touched on it. I would shy away from giving like very tangible emotional advice on the internet at all. Actually, we're not allowed to, in accordance with my registration and my licensing. And any clinician who is registered and licensed follows very strict regulatory body guidelines. And that's why you want to see them, because we have to be very careful. So we don't give advice because every single person is different. So I think starting with not giving advice, but also like, I love that you said, I take it from my own lens because this is me, right? And I'm talking about me. I might give very broad general suggestions on managing your nervous system, right? Not advice, but I might be saying like, deep breathing or essential oils, or like that is pretty much applicable to most people in the population. We know that calms down your nervous system. I'm not going to tell you strategies to open up your emotional wounds on the internet and then open up everything for you so that you don't know what to do with yourself, and then in an Instagram post teach you how to process it. That is impossible and very unethical. So don't do that.
And if you're following somebody who's doing that, probably, take a
Yeah.
look at their credentials.
Correct. So, yes, our bodies do not allow us. We can give evidence based information. We can provide very general information and strategies. We can give you context. We cannot ever give you advice. And actually, as a therapist, I can't typically give you advice on your life anyway. It's like, how am I processing your emotions? But I think that's the same between the both of us. In fact, I think I actually have stricter guidelines as a clinician than other people might have who are not tied to a regulatory body, which is a downfall, or maybe it's not because we're protecting the public. But if I'm a creator, I'm limited by a lot of things. There's a lot I can't post. There's a lot I can't do, and there is a lot I can't say. So you might actually be in a position where you can say a whole lot more than I can, which is interesting because you'd think the opposite, but it's not true.
Well, and I think, we could have a jillion hours worth of conversation about this because it comes down to like, I can say whatever I want, free speech, hashtag free speech. But, I'm also very aware because of my own therapy experience and the wounds that I have had to crawl through, the deep darkness of the soul, that I don't like. I want to make sure that I'm doing the best that I can do to not just protect myself and like liability, but like
Yeah.
protect other people. Like
Yeah.
I want, and but not everybody is good like that. And I do think for me nowadays, as someone who is a creator and a consumer of content about caregiving and mental health, I'm very wary of someone who's been an expert in 27 other things over the last 5 years, suddenly becoming an expert in caregiver burnout or whatever, trying to talk to me. I'm like, you know, I respect your opinion on lots of things, but where are your credentials? And I want to
Sure.
see credentials. And for me, like when I'm sharing, I'm like, my only credential is experience. And I'm not trying to tell you what you should do. I'm trying to tell you what I did and what helped me. That's the biggest difference. But
Right.
also to your point, you're not trying to tell people what to do either. You're sharing suggestions, research, information that is factual, and then people can do with that what they want. So I think that's a very important distinction. But I just think as the space but continues to grow, I feel like caregivers are super vulnerable. They want an answer. They want to be able to have a little label that they can slap on it with some solutions that they can check off. And while that may be helpful, I just am worried that it's going to just be another thing that we fail at because it doesn't work.
Well, and I want to name that right now, the word caregiver is very buzzworthy and it's a double edged sword. It's really good because we have a lot more awareness out there about caregiving, celebrities, and the news. Like, that's all great because we were never acknowledged before. The very not good part about all of this is that you're seeing people see this as a profitable area. There's an area of millions and millions of vulnerable people who are caregivers. And unfortunately, I am seeing people in this space, as you said, come in and say, I can do this. I
Yeah.
know about caregiver burnout. And I'm not just saying the lay public. There are therapists who are seeing this as a niche they want to enter. There are other people seeing this as a niche. And I think that you're right. You have to look at what's behind it. And experience counts for a lot. Like, I have a lot of clients who will come to us. Every practitioner in our practice has been a caregiver. Almost all of them, except for one, has been a family caregiver. And you have to be able to understand the caregiver experience. So I would say your experience, even if you're not a clinician, is a lot more valuable than the clinician who doesn't know a thing about caregiving, except for the fact that they probably know what to do. And I would hope so, not always, but know what to do when somebody is, escalating or
Right.
in a dangerous situation or, you know, at risk. Those are all of the things that we are trained to do. Like,
Right.
I can open up your emotional Pandora's box because I know how much of it I should go in back,
Yes.
and I know what to do if you're an emergency situation. So that's a lens that we have. But there's a lot of people out there who are they have all of the degrees and information. They don't know a thing about caregivers.
I have been fortunate to have many good therapists. At different times, I needed different support. And so, different types of therapists.
We also have a standard that if you don't know how to deal with what you're dealing with, you need to refer them out to someone who knows how to deal with it,
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
That's also a standard of practice. Now, does everyone do that? No, but yes.
This has been a great conversation. And like I said, I know we could dive deeper into all of these things, but I'm just fascinated by what's happening in the caregiving creator space. And I want to make sure that we're caregivers listening to this today, just kind of have a little bit of a clear eye about what's going on out there and that they are being well educated on what is going on the internet and in regards to caregiver support and therapy with caregivers that we can share, because this is, I want caregivers that follow me to have the wealth of knowledge that all of my caregiver friends online have. And so I think that's really important. But is there anything else that you want to share today before we sign off?
No, I mean, I think this is an excellent conversation. It's a space that people are not getting into. And it's actually something I've been talking about behind the scenes with people about, like, my worry about what's happening with this buzzword. But no, I think, like, continue these conversations. They're great conversations.
Yeah. Therapy is a buzzword and caregiving is a buzzword.
Trauma is a buzzword.
Nervous system.
Narcissism. There's a lot of buzzwords out there.
Yeah. So we're going to keep having this conversation. We're going to keep sharing about it. But in the meantime, we're going to sign off for today. Stephanie, I will link your Instagram and also your website and your podcast in the show notes today. Thank you so much for joining me. And thank you all for joining us today on the From Guilt to Good podcast. To access additional caregiver resources, support our show, and connect with us and Stephanie on social, check out the show notes. We're changing the conversation around caregiving one episode at a time. Remember, you can be a good caregiver and still have a life outside of caring for your parents.